want that tour. We're trying to rush at the very beginning, so we only have 5 or 6 minutes, but once we actually get on the train, then we'll start to slow down a little bit.
Okay.
The sensory feeling. Walt, he was influenced a lot when he was a child growing up in Marceline, Missouri in the early 1900s. And he wanted a part that conveyed that hometown USA feeling. And the best way he felt to convey that feeling was with an authentic steam railroad. And that's why we have that steam-powered engine running around all of our parks. So if you want, I'm going to give you a few moments. Go ahead and take a couple pictures of a completely empty Main Street.
Is it refurbished in Strasbourg?
Yes. Strasbourg. Now we heard a series of whistles right now. It was a long whistle, a long, a short, and a long. That means here comes the train. We're going to hear that series long, long, short, long. Whenever we're coming to a parade, whenever we're coming to like a public list, paying that close attention to all the brakes on the underside of the train cars, once he's checked this section, he's going to call up to the engineer or the fireman, whoever's assisting him, he's going to call a buzz buzz. They're going to go to the buzz box and they're going to give that little 2 signal up to the engineer. The engineer at that point is going to give the 2 whistle and pull out to the next orange dot. Orange dot to orange dot to orange dot until that maintenance cast member's completely checked the brakes underneath the train or the brake reservoir. That houses all that pressure that we use to activate the brakes. And right here is the brake pump that creates all that pressure, sending it down into the air brake reservoir, which is then transferred down to all the train cars. The train cars is where all the brakes are. There are no brakes on the engine itself. It's much easier for all these train cars to try and pull that engine to a stop than for this engine to try and push 85 tons of weight to a stop. Much easier that way. So when we have to uncouple our engine from the train cars to swap whatever line of train cars we're pulling, there's no brakes on this when we do that. The only way to stop this engine when we're doing that, switching the train cars, is with the Johnson bar, that J bar. That's the gear essentially, either forward or reverse. So when we're going forward, those engineers are pulling it back to them to slow it down. When we're going in reverse, they're thrusting that Johnson bar away from them to slow it down that way as well. That was their brake test, so testing those brakes. So here we have the engine and the boiler. This long red tube right here is the boiler. Inside that boiler are a bunch of little pipes known as flues, and that's what's creating that heat. That's what's drawing that heat that heats up the water. So the way this engine works, and the way it operates and creates all that steam and powers the engine and pulls the train, right down here we have the firebox. And we'll see a closer look at that inside the cab. Once the fireman throws that fire, that ball of waste is going to light up. He's going to throw that into the firebox, and all that fuel is being jutted out into that firebox as well. Once the firebox is lit, that's where the flues come into play. We're going to create a draft pulling all that heat from the firebox down through the boiler. Surrounding all these flues is the water. Once all those hot flues start heating up the water, they're going to boil, and that steam that's created comes right up here to the steam dome. You can see it steaming. From the steam dome, all that steam is rerouted through the boiler, right here into the smoke box. Now the smoke box is what separates that steam and all that fuel. All the steam that we're going to use, that sheer steam power that we want to use and utilize the harness, it comes down right into the steam chest. From the steam chest, it's pushed down here into the pistons and the cylinders that are moving back and forth in here, and those are connected to the drive arms. Now as you can see, the drive arms are connected to the drive wheels, and that's essentially how the engine moves. Does that make sense? Now I mentioned the smoke box separates. The sheer steam comes down, and all that fuel, that waste that we can't use, that's what's shot out of the smokestack. A couple more pieces I'd like to point out. If you look at the top of the steam dome, you'll see the steam valve. We're going to see that in action a little bit later. That's very important. When our boiler pressure gets too high, that's going to open up, and you're going to see just this huge stream of steam coming out of the top. Very loud. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. We'll see an example of it. This number 1 dome. This is what's known as the sand dome. Originally, these were filled with sand during some of the snowy and icy conditions. That sand would be dispensed along the track, and that would allow for greater traction. Now here in Central Florida, we don't exactly have a lot of snow and ice, but the tracks do get wet. So we don't use the sand dome, we have something else that we use. And earlier, when we saw the train going from the middle of the train station to Main Street, out towards the end, we saw all that steam coming out from the front pilot wheels. That is how we dry up any of that steam or any of that condensation or rainwater that's on the tracks. There's a little lever inside, and we'll see that when we get in there. There's a little lever known as the steam cock. We open that up, and that releases all that built-up pressure that we have. And it releases it right out from the side of the pilot wheels. And that's how we can dry up the tracks. The bell, we haven't heard the bell yet. We're going to hear the bell, we're going to hear the firemen specifically ring the bell once the park is open. The only time we ring the bell is when we're pulling into a train station. That lets the platform conductor know that we're taking on passengers. Park's not open, not taking on passengers just yet. Is this train coming out? I want to pause once they get side by side. It's a great photo op. I think they're almost ready. That's rolled up balls of waste. That is recycled Walt Disney World furniture. When we're swapping out mattresses or chairs or couches, we're going to cut them open, gut out the inside, roll the insides in balls, soak them in diesel fire, light them on fire, or soak them in diesel fuel, light them on fire, and throw them in the firebox. And that's how we light our engines every day.
No wasting.
Now, if anyone wants, they're more than welcome to sit in the engineer seat. But as you can feel, it's very warm. So if you're going to sit in the engineer seat, just do me a favor and keep your legs towards me. Oh, we have a taker. Excellent. In fact, you can feel how warm it is in here. In the summer months, July, August, it gets upwards of about 140 degrees in here.
It's been this in the winter.
For that reason, our firemen and engineers, they take about 4 laps around the Magic Kingdom before swapping out. 2 laps as a fireman, 2 laps as an engineer. So they're 80 minutes on, 40 minutes off to cool down and rehydrate. Now, Jerry, you'd be the engineer today. You would be in charge of driving and operating this engine, this train.
Would be, huh?
One of the first things you would do, don't touch it, it's very warm, but the Johnson bar. You would take that and put it in its gear. Right now it's in neutral. For forward motion, it's pretty simple. You just thrust it away from you. For reverse, you just pull it back towards you. Once the Johnson bar is in its appropriate gear, now we have the throttle, this horizontal lever. This throttle is very, very touchy. Like most first-time engineers in the Magic Kingdom, I also made that mistake of pulling back on the throttle pretty hard, and the train jumped. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the number 4 engine that we rode in on, the Royal Disney, manufactured in 1916, almost 100 years old. And by gently tapping the throttle back, we're able to keep these engines in as pristine condition as possible. Now here we have the brake, and the brake works a little bit differently than that of a car. On a car, you apply various amounts of pressure and the car responds accordingly. Here on the train, the brake's either on or the air brakes are off. And that's that jerking sensation. The engineer throwing the brake on for 2 or 3 seconds, throwing the brake off to come to that stop. Now on the floor, next to you, Jerry, you're going to see a little foot pedal. That foot pedal is known as the steam cock. That steam cock houses all that pressure for the Johnson bar. So if we need to perform an emergency stop for any reason, one of the first things the engineer is going to do is lay off his throttle, kick open that steam cock, releasing all that built up steam pressure, and that makes it easier to pull that Johnson bar back into reverse for additional stopping power. But that steam cock also opens up while it releases. We have the speedometer right up here, 10 miles an hour as I mentioned. We go, earlier I mentioned that. If we go any faster, 11 or 12, we're going to get what's known as an overspeed violation. When that happens, there's a little box in that first train car underneath that first seat that's going to light up. The only way to turn that light off if they get that speed violation, is for a member of our maintenance team to come all the way out to it and turn it off with a special key. So there's no hiding the fact that you're speeding around the mountain. And here we have the best part of being an engineer, the whistle. I'd love to let you blow it, but even back here,
please, I've always wanted to do this.
I can't.
Jerry.
Even back here, it is still that form of communication, and it is that safety feature. So I'd love to let you. I'm pushing to try and let us be able to do that, but sorry.
Maybe you can hold it and just take a picture of it or something.
You can take a picture if you need to, but
I'm so tempted. I'm so
let
tempted.
Let go of that. Thank you for letting me keep my job. I appreciate it. And that's essentially everything that the engineer does. The only thing the engineer is going to do at the train station is keep an eye on the stopwatch.
Oh, now this is an ancient relic from back in the day.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
It predates the sundial. Once we're at the train station, in about a minute and a half, the engineer is going to blow the whistle once. And that one whistle just means, hey, something is about to happen, be prepared. At 2 minutes, they're going to blow it once again. Hey, be prepared, something's about to happen. At 2.5 minutes, they're going to blow that whistle twice. That twice means, let's go. They're letting the conductor in the back know, hey, we've been here 2.5 minutes, I'm ready to go. Do I have your permission to depart the train station? And that's everything the engineer does. Now the fireman has a little more duties and responsibilities. The fireman is in charge of lighting the firebox. First thing the fireman is going to do is pull out the pin, open up the entire face of the firebox. He's going to grab one of those balls of waste I showed you, light it on fire, and throw it into the firebox. Once that ball of waste is inside the firebox, he or she is going to adjust the fuel line and the atomizer. Now the atomizer works very similar to a water spray bottle. The diesel fuel, as a liquid, is not flammable, but once it's broken up into that mist, it's extremely combustible, and that's what our atomizer does for us, breaking that up, spitting that mist inside the firebox. Once we have our healthy glow of the fire that we're looking for, now we're going to take a look at boiler pressure. Right now we're at about 110 pounds per square inch, about 110 psi in that big black gauge right there. We try and keep it at about 140 psi while the train is in motion. The reason for that is because if the fire happens to go out, we have enough stored pressure at 140 psi that we can continue movement on the stored pressure, giving the firemen enough time to light another ball of waste and get that firebox relit. So no one even knows that the firebox has been put out. Next, that white gauge is a brake pressure gauge. There's 2 needles. The first needle shows how much stored pressure we have in the air reservoir or brake reservoir I showed you underneath the fireman. The second needle is how much pressure is actually being utilized while the brakes are engaged. Once we've checked our pressure gauges, now we're curious about water levels inside the boiler. To do that, we're going to take a look right over here at our sight glass. Very simplistic form of determining water levels. 1 bolt of water, all the way up to 5 bolts of water. And you can see we're just shy of 3 bolts. We're at about 2.5 bolts of water. Ideally, we want to keep it between 2 and 4 bolts. If the sight glass happens to malfunction, we do have an original form of determining water levels inside the boiler. These 3 valves, known as the tricots. If we open up the top valve, we want just steam. If we open up the bottom valve, we want that healthy mixture of steam and water. That bottom valve is crucial. If any amount of steam comes out, we're running pretty dangerously low on water. We want only water out of that bottom valve. Before we get dangerously low, we have a safety check on board. There's a little black box on the wall next to the fireman's foot. That's known as the MAPO. In 1964, Disney came out with a little movie you may have heard of called Mary Poppins. That movie was so successful, so popular, that from the profits of that movie alone, we were able to create an entire division that contributes to a lot of our safety features around Walt Disney World property and a lot of our audio animatronics as well. MAPO. M-A for Mary, P-O for Poppins. We even named it after her. Right up here on the wall, we have the buzz box, how we hear that form of communication from the conductor in the back. And then we have our bell that I mentioned earlier. We're only going to ring the bell when we're approaching a train station and we're getting ready to take on guests and the passengers. Any questions about what goes on up in the cab? That's essentially everything that a fireman and engineer does up in the cab. Any additional questions?
Can I ring the bell at least?
Sorry. I'd love to let you, but
this guy just wants to get you fired.
You just want to pull something. I don't blame you.
It is a giant toy. So.
Yeah.
Take a job here. Become an engineer.
Sure.
Pull it all you want.
Again and again.
Alright. So look more excited.
You're holding fire.
Now, part of the engineer initiation, the first time you do it, they don't give you a glove. Well, they always give you a glove. Safety first.
Her glove is on fire.
Oh, I
Very
hate
difficult.
an
It's very difficult to get that fire lit that first time. That ball of waste has to be in a pretty particular area. How hot that was in there. So imagine the very little space that they have to work with as they're reaching around the boiler for all those valves. There you go. There's fire. The firebox starts to take cold down here.